On the afternoon of April 4th, 1922, a man named Georg Siegel walked up the path leading to the Hinterkaifeck farmstead near the village of Graben in Bavaria, Germany. He was a neighbor. He had been asked by other villagers to check on the family who lived there. No one had seen them in several days. The children had not come to school. The family had missed church on Sunday. This was unusual. The family was reliable. They kept to their routines. Georg reached the farmhouse and called out. No one answered. He noticed the barn door was open. He walked toward it. Inside, he found the bodies. He stepped back. He stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and ran back down the path. He ran all the way to the village. He found the mayor. He told him what he had seen. The mayor telephoned the police. Officers arrived from the town of Schrobenhausen, approximately 40 kilometers away. There were 4 of them. They entered the property with caution. They went to the barn first. Inside, they found 4 bodies, 2 adults, 2 children. All had been killed with a blunt instrument. The skulls were crushed. The bodies had been arranged. They were lying side by side. They had been covered with hay and straw. The officers examined the scene. They noted that the bodies appeared to have been there for several days. They noted that someone had moved them. Someone had taken the time to cover them. The officers left the barn and went to the house. The front door was unlocked. They entered. The house was quiet. They moved through the kitchen and into the living area. They found nothing unusual. They went upstairs. In one of the bedrooms, they found 2 more bodies. A woman, an infant. Both had been killed in the same manner. Their skulls had been crushed. The woman was lying on the bed. The infant was beside her. The bodies had not been moved or covered. They had been left where they fell. The officers searched the rest of the house. They found no one else. They found no signs of a struggle beyond the bedrooms and barn. They found that someone had been living in the house after the murders. Food had been eaten. Dishes had been used and washed. The fire in the stove had been tended. Someone had stayed. The officers did not understand. They called for additional assistance. The Hinterkaifeck farmstead was located in a remote area approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich. The property consisted of a farmhouse, a barn, and several outbuildings surrounded by fields. The nearest village was Gröben, about 1 kilometer away. The nearest neighbor lived half a kilometer down the road. The farm had been in the same family for generations. It was isolated. It was quiet. It was unremarkable. The farm was owned by a man named Andreas Gruber. He was 63 years old. He had been born on the property. He had worked the land his entire life. He grew wheat and rye. He kept cows, pigs, and chickens. The farm was small but productive. Andreas was known in the Heimebus village as a difficult man. He was stern. He did not socialize. He did not tolerate foolishness. He had strong opinions and expressed them freely. Some people respected him. Others avoided him. Andreas lived on the farm with his wife, Cecilia Gruber. She was 72 years old. She had married Andreas in 1884. They had raised 3 children on the farm. 2 had moved away. 1 daughter, Victoria, had remained. Cecilia was frail. She had trouble walking. She spent most of her time in the house. She cooked, she cleaned, she cared for the younger children. Neighbors who knew her said she was quiet and obedient. She rarely left the property. Victoria Gabriel was Andreas and Cecilia's daughter. She was 35 years old. She had been married to a man named Karl Gabriel. Karl had disappeared in 1914 during the First World War. He had been reported missing in action. He had never returned. Victoria had waited for several years before accepting that he was dead. She had continued to live on the farm with her parents. She helped with the work. She managed the household accounts. She cared for her children. Victoria had two children. Her daughter Cecilia was 7 years old. She was named after her grandmother. She attended the village school. Teachers described her as a bright and polite child. She walked to school each morning with her brother. Her son, Joseph, was 2 years old. He was too young for school. He stayed at home with his grandmother. He was a quiet child. He played in the yard. He followed his mother around the house. There was also a maid. Her name was Maria Baumgartner. She was 44 years old. She had come to work at the farm only on March 31st, 1922. She had been hired to replace the previous maid, who had left suddenly. The previous maid had told people in the village that she believed the farm was haunted. She said she heard sounds at night. She said she felt watched. She said she would not stay. Maria Baumgartner needed the work. She did not believe in ghosts. She took the position. She had been at the farm for less than a week when she was killed. In the days before the murders, Andreas Gruber had mentioned strange occurrences to several people. He told a neighbor that he had found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to the farm. He said the footprints stopped at the barn. He said there were no footprints leading away. The neighbor asked if he had checked the barn. Andreas said he had. He said he found nothing. He said it made no sense. Andreas also mentioned that he had heard sounds coming from the attic. He said it sounded like footsteps. He said he had gone up to check. He said he found nothing. He said the sounds continued. He said he heard them at night. He said his wife had heard them too. The neighbor asked if he had reported it to the police. Andreas said no. He said he did not trust the police. He said he would handle it himself. A few days before the murders, Andreas discovered that one of his tools was missing from the barn. He mentioned this to another neighbor. He said it was a mattock, a tool used for digging. He said he had left it in the barn. He said it was gone. He said he did not know who had taken it. He said he suspected someone was playing tricks on him. Victoria had also noticed strange things. She told a friend in the village that food had been disappearing from the pantry. She said she had baked bread. She said some of it was missing the next day. She said she thought perhaps her mother had given it to someone, but her mother said she had not. Victoria said she did not understand. She said it made her uneasy. On the morning of March 31, 1922, the previous maid left the farm. She told people in the village that she could not stay another night. She said she had heard sounds in the walls. She said she felt a presence. She said the Grubers did not take her seriously. She said she was afraid. She collected her wages and left. Maria Baumgartner arrived later that same day. She was shown to her room in the attic. She unpacked her belongings. She began her duties. She did not mention anything unusual. The last confirmed sighting of the family alive was on the evening of March 31st, 1922. A neighbor saw Andreas and Victoria walking from the barn to the house around 7 o'clock. They appeared normal. They went inside. The lights in the house were visible for a short time. Then they went out. This was typical. The family went to bed early. The next morning, young Cecilia did not arrive at school. Her brother usually walked with her, but he was too young to attend. The teacher assumed the child was ill. She did not think much of it. By the afternoon, several villagers noticed that no one had been seen leaving or entering the farm. This was unusual, but not alarming. By Sunday, April 2nd, the family did not attend church. This was more concerning. The Grubers were not deeply religious, but they attended church regularly. People began to talk. By Monday, April 3rd, the mailman reported that mail had been accumulating at the farm. He said he had knocked on the door. No one answered. He said the animals were making noise. They sounded distressed. He said something felt wrong. By Tuesday, April 4th, the villagers decided someone should check on the family. Georg Siegel volunteered. He went to the farm. He found the bodies. The investigation began immediately. The bodies were examined where they were found. The medical examiner determined that all 6 victims had been killed with a blunt object, likely the missing mattock. The wounds were severe. The skulls had been crushed. Death would not have been immediate for all victims. Some had suffered. Andreas Gruber had been struck from behind. The blow had fractured his skull. He had fallen forward. He had been struck again while on the ground. Cecilia Gruber, the grandmother, had also been struck from behind. She had fallen. She had been struck multiple times. Young Cecilia, the 7-year-old girl, had been struck in the head. The medical examiner noted that she may have survived the initial blow. There were indications that she had lived for some time after being attacked. She had torn out clumps of her own hair. This suggested she had been in pain. She had been conscious. She had suffered before dying. Joseph, the 2-year-old boy, had also been struck in the head. His skull was fractured. He had died quickly. The 4 bodies in the barn had been arranged carefully after death. Someone had taken the time to lay them out. Someone had covered them with hay. This suggested the killer had remained calm. The killer had not panicked. Inside the house, Victoria Gabriel had been killed in her bedroom. She had been struck multiple times. The infant, also named Joseph, was beside her. He had been killed in the same manner. Both had been left where they fell. The killer had not moved them. The killer had not covered them. Investigators determined that the murders had likely occurred on the night of March 31st or the early morning of April 3rd. This was based on the condition of the bodies and the last confirmed sightings of the family. What disturbed investigators most was what they found in the house after the murders. Someone had been living in the house. Food had been prepared and eaten. Bread had been sliced. Milk had been poured. Dishes had been used and washed and put away. The fire in the kitchen stove had been kept burning. Wood had been added. Ashes had been cleaned out. The animals had been fed and watered. The cows had been milked. The milk had been stored. The chickens had been tended. The pigs had been given food. Someone had cared for the farm. Neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney on April 1st and April 2nd. They had assumed the family was home. They had assumed everything was normal. But the family was already dead. Someone else had been in the house. Someone had been cooking. Someone had been living among the bodies. Investigators searched the house thoroughly. They found no signs of forced entry. The doors had been unlocked. The windows were intact. The killer had walked in freely. In the attic, where Maria Baumgartner had slept, investigators found evidence that someone had been staying there before her arrival. There was a small pile of food scraps in the corner. There were indentations on the floor suggesting someone had been sitting or lying there for an extended period. There were scratches on the wall. The scratches appeared deliberate. They formed no recognizable pattern. Investigators also found that a substantial amount of money was missing from the house. Andreas Gruber had kept cash in a locked box in his bedroom. The box had been forced open. Approximately 4,000 marks were missing. This was a significant sum. It represented years of savings. Victoria's jewelry was also gone. It had been kept in a drawer in her room. The drawer had been emptied. The investigation expanded. Police interviewed everyone in the village. They interviewed neighbors. They interviewed people who had done business with the Grubers. They interviewed the previous maid. They asked if anyone had seen strangers in the area. Several people reported seeing an unfamiliar man near the farm in the weeks before the murders. The descriptions were vague. Some said he was tall. Others said he was average height. Some said he was young. Others said he was middle-aged. No one knew his name. No one knew where he had come from. He had not been seen after the murders. One theory was that the killer had been hiding in the attic before the murders. The footprints Andreas had found in the snow supported this. The sounds from the attic supported this. The missing food supported this. Investigators believed someone had been living in the attic, watching the family, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment. On the night of March 31st, that moment came. The killer descended from the attic. The killer went to the barn where Andreas, Kazilia, young Kazilia, and Josef had gone to do evening chores. The killer attacked them one by one. Then the killer went to the house and killed Victoria and the infant. After the murders, the killer stayed. For days. The killer ate the family's food. The killer slept in their house. The killer maintained the farm. Why? Investigators could not determine a clear answer. Some believed the killer stayed to avoid suspicion. Smoke from the chimney would indicate the family was home. Tended animals would suggest normalcy. Others believed the killer stayed because the killer wanted to, because the killer felt safe, because the killer was comfortable among the dead. The investigation identified several suspects. One was a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was a neighbor. He had been romantically involved with Victoria Gabriel before her husband disappeared. There were rumors that Lorenz was the father of Victoria's youngest son, Josef. Lorenz denied this. He said he had not been involved with Victoria in years. He said he had nothing to do with the murders. He had an alibi for the night of March 31st. His family confirmed he had been home. But investigators were not entirely convinced. Lorenz had been one of the first people to arrive at the farm after the bodies were discovered. He had entered the house before the police arrived. He had touched things. Some believed he had been looking for something. Others believed he was simply curious. Lorenz was questioned multiple times. He was never charged. Another suspect was Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel. He had been reported missing during the war, but his body had never been found. Some people believed he had not died. Some believed he had deserted. Some believed he had returned and found his wife living with another man's child. Some believed he had killed the family in a fit of rage. Investigators searched for evidence that Carl Gabriel was alive. They found none. His military records confirmed he had been reported missing. No sightings of him had been confirmed. The theory was eventually dismissed. A third suspect was a traveling laborer who had been seen in the area in March 1922. Several witnesses reported seeing a man matching his description near the farm. He had asked for work. He had been turned away. Some believed he had held a grudge. Some believed he had returned to rob the family. Investigators attempted to locate this man. They circulated descriptions. They checked with neighboring towns. The man was never found. He had disappeared. Despite extensive investigation, no one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. The case remained open. Investigators continued to receive tips for years. None led to a conviction. The murders at Hinterkaifeck became one of the most infamous unsolved cases in German history. The farmstead was eventually demolished. The property was sold. The new owner did not want the buildings. They held too much. Darkness. The barn was torn down first. Then the house. The land was cleared. It was left fallow for several years. Eventually, it was plowed and planted. Today, the site is part of a larger farm. There is no marker, no memorial. Few people know what happened there. The 6 victims were buried in the cemetery in Weidhofen, a nearby town. Their graves are marked with simple stones. The stones list their names and dates of death. They do not provide details. The graves are visited occasionally by historians and those interested in true crime. Most visitors are not local. Most locals prefer to forget. In the years following the murders, several people who had been involved in the investigation spoke about the case. One police officer said the scene was unlike anything he had encountered. He said the arrangement of the bodies in the barn suggested a methodical mind. He said the fact that the killer had stayed in the house suggested something else. He said it suggested the killer was not afraid. He said it suggested the killer had wanted to stay. He said this disturbed him more than the violence. A doctor who examined the bodies noted that young Cecilia, the 7-year-old girl, had suffered the most. He said the evidence suggested she had been alive for several hours after the attack. He said she had been conscious. He said she had been in pain. He said she had been unable to call for help. He said this haunted him. He said he thought about her often. He said he hoped she had not understood what was happening. He said he hoped she had not been afraid. A villager who had known the family said she had always thought something was wrong at the farm. She said Andreas was a hard man. She said there were rumors about the family. She said people talked. She said some believed there were secrets. She said she did not know what those secrets were. She said after the murders, people talked even more. She said some believed the family had been cursed. She said some believed they had done something to deserve it. She said she did not believe that. She said no one deserves to die that way. The previous maid, the one who had left before Maria Baumgartner arrived, gave an interview in 1923. She said she had heard footsteps in the attic at night. She said she had told Andreas. She said he dismissed her concerns. She said she heard other sounds too. She said she heard breathing. She said she felt watched. She said she left because she could not sleep. She said she felt guilty for leaving. She said if she had stayed, perhaps she would have noticed something. Perhaps she could have warned them. She said she knew this was not rational. She said she felt guilty anyway. Maria Baumgartner's family requested that her body be returned to them. She was buried in her hometown. Her family did not speak publicly about her death. They requested privacy. That request was honored. A small notice appeared in the local newspaper. It stated that Maria had died tragically. Did not provide details. Theories about the case have persisted for more than a century. Some believe the killer was someone the family knew, someone who had been to the farm before, someone who knew the layout, someone who knew where Andreas kept his money. Others believe the killer was a stranger, a drifter, someone who stumbled upon the farm and saw an opportunity. Others believe the killer was Carl Gabriel, that he had survived the war, that he had returned to find his wife had moved on, that he had killed them all in revenge. Some believe the killer was motivated by money. The missing 4,000 marks support this. Others believe the motive was personal, a grudge, a slight, a perceived wrong. Others believe there was no clear motive, that the killer was disturbed, that the killer killed because the killer wanted to, that the killer stayed because the killer could. One detail that has never been adequately explained is why the killer stayed. Most criminals flee after committing murder. They put distance between themselves and the crime. They do not remain at the scene. They do not eat the victim's food. They do not sleep in the victim's house. They do not tend to the victim's animals. But this killer did, for days. This suggests something unusual about the killer's psychology. It suggests the killer felt safe. It suggests the killer felt entitled. It suggests the killer was not afraid of being caught. Another detail that has troubled investigators and historians is the care with which the bodies in the barn were arranged. The killer had taken time to lay them out. The killer had covered them with hay. This suggests a level of calm, a level of control. Most killers in a state of rage or panic do not arrange bodies. They leave them where they fall. But this killer did not. This suggests premeditation. This suggests planning. The case has been reopened several times over the decades. New investigators have reviewed the evidence. New theories have been proposed. Forensic techniques that did not exist in 1922 have been applied to the remaining evidence. DNA testing was attempted on items recovered from the scene. The results were inconclusive. The evidence had deteriorated over time. The samples were contaminated. No definitive conclusions could be drawn. In 2007, students from the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy conducted a cold case review of the murders as part of their training. They examined all available evidence. They interviewed descendants of witnesses. They constructed a timeline. They developed several theories. They concluded that the most likely scenario was that the killer had been hiding in the attic for several days before the murders. They believed the killer had learned the family's routines. They believed the killer had chosen the night of March 31st because the new maid had just arrived. They believed the killer wanted to eliminate all witnesses at once. They concluded that the killer was likely someone with military experience, someone who was comfortable with violence, someone who could remain calm under pressure. They identified several potential suspects based on this profile. All were deceased. The case remained unsolved. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most infamous unsolved crimes. Books have been written about the case. Documentaries have been made. Theories continue to be debated. But the truth remains unknown. 6 people died on that farm in March and April 1922. Andreas Gruber, Cecilia Gruber, Victoria Gabriel, Cecilia Gabriel, Josef Gabriel, Maria Baumgartner. They were killed by someone who then stayed in their house, someone who lived among their bodies, someone who ate their food and tended their animals and slept in their beds, someone who walked away and was never caught. The case is closed but not solved. The files remain in the archives. The photographs remain sealed. The questions remain unanswered. Who killed the family at Hinterkaifeck? Why did the killer stay? Where did the killer go? No one knows. No one will ever know. The killer took those answers to the grave. And the farm is gone. The house is gone. The barn is gone. Only the land remains. And the land does not remember. The land does not speak. The land grows wheat now. And people walk across it without knowing, without feeling, without understanding that beneath their feet 6 people once lived. 6 people once died. And someone stayed.